let's get down to the real business of taking care of the people.
We can't have a testimony without a test. And we are being tested whether we have courage enough, conviction enough, people power enough to stand up and do what is right for ourselves and generations yet unborn. Come on.
Joining me today is Winnie Wong. She is the founder of People for Bernie, and she got the hashtag Feel the Bern going throughout the world. I am so excited to have her with me on the Nina Turner Show on the Real News Network. Winnie, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here. You did a whole bunch of Occupy.
I was a day one organizer with Occupy, so I was in the park on the first day, and I stayed till the end, till the eviction. Oddly, at Occupy, I did a lot of sustainability work. So we brought in like different sort of plants and trees, and we had a vision of like what it would be to build a different world. Mm-hmm. So because my background actually is in design, sustainable design, and so we were the people who started the sustainability working group. So that's actually what I did at Occupy Wall Street. I really had like this idea that we could sort of design our way out of this hole, and without ever really thinking about electoral work at all. So it's odd that like 5 years later, I find myself doing electoral organizing instead of work that is very rooted in community.
Do you see any parallels between what you did with Occupy, which really shook the foundations in terms of grassroots mobilization of people all across the country, and what you were able to bring to People for Bernie and getting that hashtag Feel the Bern? And are you still feeling the burn?
I mean, I'll never stop feeling the burn. I'm still Sanders.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, Occupy Wall Street, we brought the day-to-day concerns, the 99%, and we normalized that. And we saw in 5 years how there has been this massive uprising against the 1%, right? So there is actually this global uprising of the 99% who are insurging against the oligarchy, the ruling class, the elite, the enormously wealthy around the world. And so, we have come a long way, and I do believe that the Sanders campaign electoralized some of that movement work, and we started in Zuccotti Park, and then within a very short amount of time, there were 1,500 encampments that sprang up across the country. And of course, the state was very brutal and efficient in the way that it crushed that movement, but that opened up the doorway to other movements, and so now what we're seeing is a movement of movements, which is very exciting.
And movements never end. I mean, there's some people that say that the whole notion of the Bernie-crats or Feel the Bern, that it is not going to sustain, that it is temporary. What do you say to that particular critique, that this is just a very small window in time and that is not sustainable?
Well, tactics are constantly evolving, right? And so if for me, I viewed Bernie Sanders as a tactic, which I think I've talked about extensively in other interviews. It doesn't mean that like when it's time to come up with a new tactic, I won't be ready, right? But the reality is Bernie is the most high-profile politician, not just in America, but in the world. And so it's really helpful for us to be building power under a canopy that is Bernie Sanders branded. Right, People for Bernie is a big canopy. It's a big umbrella. Millions of people stand under it. They agree with his policies. They agree with his politics, and so that's where we are in this moment. Right. I mean, Bernie Sanders isn't going to live forever. Neither will I. Neither will you. But in this moment, his politics and his policies are resonating with millions of people across America, but also across the world, and those are the sort of economic conditions of the 99%.
In terms of your cachet in this movement, it really is no small feat that you were able to create People for Bernie, and not only create it, have a hashtag that took off. I mean, that really is a big deal. And as a woman and a woman of color, to be able to use your intellect and your creativity to do something like that, that will never, it will be forever, hashtag Feel the Burn. How do you feel about that space, and what do you do to take that Feel the Burn moment of your leadership to the next level for what we have to do in this country moving forward? And particularly if you can talk a lot about the midterm elections of 2018.
So I see myself as nobody extraordinary. I'm an organizer. I've been an organizer for a decade, and I will always be an organizer probably until the day that I die. And so I'm pleased that that hashtag was helpful in distributing the narrative of the Bernie campaign across the internet, right? Like, I'm happy that it resulted in, millions of young people discovering Bernie through various social media channels like Instagram and Twitter, and then, they getting involved.
How did it come to you, though? Was it just you were laying, drinking coffee?
No, we were actually talking about it in our team chat. We have like 8 or 10 people in a chat that we created inside Facebook, and we were sort of joking about it. This was like day one. This was the day that Bernie announced his campaign. So I had previously been involved in the draft Warren movement. And so when we knew that Elizabeth Warren was not going to run for president, my co-founder, Charles Lencher, and I decided that we needed to do something, and we needed to create a grassroots movement online that would lift up this Democratic Socialist from Vermont who was little known at the time. We knew that only really inside organizers knew about Bernie Sanders, and that he wasn't this a phenomenon, and that most people across America did not know who he was, and that he didn't have this great name recognition. We saw it as an opportunity, though, because we knew that so many organizers, committed organizers, movement people, were excited about Bernie because they are familiar with his work. And so we really we started People for Bernie with a main Facebook page and a main Twitter account, but we also created simultaneously 50 constituency Facebook pages and Twitter accounts. So each For Bernie constituency had a place. We had African Americans for Bernie, Asian Americans for Bernie, Latino Americans for Bernie, teachers for Bernie, cats for Bernie, stoners for Bernie. It went on.
I even saw Jesus Christ for Bernie.
and then more people started creating their own, sort of Facebook groups as well. We started with 50, and then we said, we need a catchy hashtag, and we talked about it within the group, and then we came up with that. We were like, it wasn't this Machiavellian moment of me sitting, at home saying, aha, this is it. It was really a group effort between myself and the core members of our collective. And then, but the tactic, of course, was that we encouraged people to use the hashtag across the internet. And we also gave away the passwords to those constituency Facebook pages. We had a large number of people join our first conference call, over 1,000 people. And then we introduced ourselves and said, we are people, we are activists, we are supporting Bernie Sanders on his primary campaign. We want you to get involved, and here are the ways that you can get involved. If you want to volunteer, go to room 1. If you want to, make phone calls, go to room 2. If you want to get involved with social media, go to room 3. And we found that 50 people went into the social media room, and then I just gave them the passwords, and they started.
And they did it.
Yeah, and they started creating their own communities.
But you're a spark yourself, Winnie. Let's put Senator Sanders aside. Just for a moment, because we need them. We're going to keep them in this movement. But you are a spark in and of your own right. What motivates you to get in the arena?
The privilege of being able to do this work is something that I'm very much aware of. I love this country. I love that.
Tell us about you and your background and your family.
So I grew up in Massachusetts. I grew up in Boston. I grew up in a community that was very close to the Black community, and then also the Asian American community. I grew up on Beacon Hill, so it was a very sort of affluent community. But because of the way Boston is sort of designed, the neighborhoods are all very close to each other. So I grew up right in the city, and so I was really influenced by all of the different communities and had exposure to so many different communities at a very young age. And my parents are very progressive people. And so I spent a lot of time as a teenager working at a health center. My parents insisted that I take my summer job there, and it was actually at this community health center in Boston. It was a community health center for Chinese people and for Puerto Ricans that I became radicalized. I started seeing how our government could do good, right? How we could actually lift people out of poverty, right? Like if you had good elected leaders, how that could happen. Yeah. And so it was incredible for me to learn at a very young age what it was like to
How young were you?
Like 13.
13.
Yeah, it was like my first job. I was a volunteer, and then when I was 14, I was legal to work there, so I worked as a receptionist, and I stayed at that health center till I was 17. And then I graduated from high school, and then I had other summer jobs. But I spent 3 years at that health center, and then was also involved with the Food Not Bombs movement. So I was really radicalized by community, right? Being of service in your community, and as a person of relative privilege, it was very helpful.
And that's in your bones. I mean,
absolutely.
When you walk into a room, people know. If you had three things that you could say to people to motivate them or to push them or to call them to action in the midst of a climate in this country and in the world that seems to have gone mad, what would be those 3 things that you would say to any generation, to any group of people to mobilize and or to move them to action?
I think that the first thing that we have to do is to not be afraid, right? Fear is never the answer. So I would say to young activists who are joining the struggle that they shouldn't be afraid. They shouldn't be afraid of the things that they don't know. They shouldn't be afraid of the unknown. They should get out of their comfort zone, and they should be more open to embracing and learning about things that they don't know. Because the more you learn, the more powerful you'll be. So that's the first thing that I would say to them. And then the second thing I would say is to love each other, right? Like that is the only way that we're going to win in this current climate. This is an administration that really is driven by hate and fear. So the antidote to that, of course, is fearlessness and love. And so it's critical that we don't that we show up for each other and get excited about those midterm elections. We have to win in 2018, and if we don't win, we're going to have 4 more years of Trump, potentially 12 more years of Trump. So these elections are very important. And so the third thing that I would say is it's critical that people participate in participation across the board is necessary. And that means you have to show up for the protest, you have to show up to the phone bank, and on election day, you have to cast your vote at the ballot box, right? And that is those are the 3 things that I think that I would say to young activists or just anybody really who is interested in getting involved.
To not be afraid.
To not be afraid. To not be afraid.
Yeah.
Fear is the mind killer. I mean, I think this is not this is not a trope. It's true. Fear is the mind killer. And they want you, the opposition, the garbage-fired Trump government, they want you to be afraid of all of the things that they are doing now to divide us by rolling out these policies and unconstitutional executive orders that are designed to make you afraid of what they might do, yanking undocumented mothers off of buses, deporting Muslims, keeping you from entering the country. It's all designed around fear, but what they're really doing, we all know, maybe people don't know, is they are keeping you in this state of absolute and utter fear so that you're paralyzed and that you can't do the thing that will organize against them and the government that is privatizing all of your benefits.
So Winnie, what does victory look like, and who are the we? And will any Democrat do? I mean, is it just good enough to be a Democrat? I mean, Mickey Mouse could run and be a Democrat. Is that good? And I love Mickey Mouse for the record, but what does it mean? What type of candidate or candidates are we looking for? Who are the we, and what does victory look like?
Well, I'm looking for a Nina Turner Democrat.
But what are the attributes to that kind of
people who
persona?
are going to be unflinching in their advocacy of working people, of poor people, of people of color, of women, of those who are most disenfranchised, of those who are marginalized in this country, of those who have been pushed to the edge, people who are going to advocate and work for those people, people who prioritize people over profits, people who will fight, who are committed to fighting the 1% and the ruling class that really that are just constantly trapped in the revolving door of our government in Washington, D.C. So those are the types of Democrats that we need. We need Democrats that are committed to fighting corruption, right? Like,
and is the Democrat label, if I'm hearing you correctly, the label Democrat is less important than the character and the caliber of the person?
The values, like progressive values in people, right? Like, we need to make sure that those people who are running on a ballot line, right? Like, regard the Democratic Party as a ballot line.
Okay.
Right? We need real progressives with progressive values who will fight for people to run on the Democratic Party ballot line in 2018.
Does that mean we challenge establishment Democrats if necessary?
Absolutely. It absolutely means that. But we have to be strategic about it as well. And so that is why it's important for the political education piece to be rolled out over the next 6 to 9 months, because it is a really critical time that we're in now.
And what's at stake, Winnie, if we, the collective we, I call it people of consciousness, right? We need people of good consciousness from all backgrounds to come together and to say, as Fannie Lou Hamer once said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. What would you, because some folks don't believe that they can make a difference. I mean, what are some really simple things that people who feel as though their voice is not being heard or they're not big enough or titled enough to get involved in this fight, what would you say to them? You know, our sister Rosario Dawson said, and it's one of my favorite quotes from her, she said, I am here to encourage your courage. What would you say to encourage people's courage?
Well, when we talk about being titled enough, I think that nobody's really titled enough. And that's important. I think that people need to think about running not just for a federal office, right? Like, they need to be running for school board. They need to be running for city council. They need to be running in their mayoral races. There's a lot of elected jobs that are out there. I think 45,000 is the number, right? So I think that it's possible for people to run for these offices, and they need to view these offices as I mean, it's a service to your country. It's a service to your brothers and sisters. And so that, I think, is something that the Democratic Party and, of course, the progressive movement needs to convey. We need to excite people. We need to excite people. And if the Democratic Party is not willing to do that, then we will do it at People for Bernie, right? And some of our allies in the progressive movement will do it with us.
How do we know when we're there? Is there a there? I mean, how do we know? Is it more of a move towards making sure that we secure our climate, or more of a move to really deal with the gutting of the Voting Rights Act on the federal level, and also in state legislatures where they have taken away access? I mean, what's our measure? How do we know when we're there?
Well, I think it's important for people to support Black struggle. I'm going to go ahead and say that. We can't, I mean, if there was one movement that you need to support and you need to learn from, it's really the Black Lives Matter movement. It's pretty coherent. Their platform pretty much lays it out. I think the Women's March on Washington also has a pretty coherent platform. I was one of the 18 co-authors on the platform document. I think we need to create intersection in our movements, and
what do you mean by that? Some viewers might not know.
That you can't just attend the climate march without realizing who is impacted first and worst, right? Which is people of color who live on the front lines in impoverished communities. Why do they live in impoverished communities? That's another layer that you have to examine. So it's a constant education process, and I think that the internet is really a great resource for that type of educational development. A lot of young millennial activists see the intersection between race and climate, right? Between class and climate, between women and climate, between Black folks and climate. I mean, so the internet is a bountiful resource for discovery, and that's why I would urge activists who are new or just ordinary folk who are tuning in to really read that Black Lives Matter policy platform, the Movement for Black Lives platform, to really read the Women's March on Washington policy platform. And it really lays it out very clearly. What are we fighting for? Okay. Who are we fighting for? How do we win? So, yeah. I mean,
that we're all in this together.
We're all in this together. I mean, we're all in this together. I mean, we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do. But the conversation is starting. We're in the middle of the political revolution. Bernie called for a political revolution.
And we're in need of everyday people putting extra on their ordinary to make extraordinary things happen in this country.
That's right. That's
All
right.
And we're going to do it, Sister
Nina Turner,
Winnie.
Democrats.
Well, thank you so much, Winnie, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, my God, this was so phenomenal. And thank all of you for joining us, too. I'm Nina Turner, and you have been watching The Nina Turner Show on the Real News Network.